Last week I streamed about the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex and the title was very clickbaity and it said the Codex is bad. And in that stream we tried to, myself and the chat who was watching live, just so you know I stream every single Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm actually live at 7 PM tonight, so you should probably tune in. Together we went through the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex and trying to work out some of the issues of the Codex and why it kind of isn't going to be very strong. It might not make a big splash in the meta like 18 Wraiths will that came out exactly the same time as Necron Codex. But before I do, I don't want this to be like a laboured point of dev bad. Like, the game of 40k is a fantastic game and it's constantly being updated. Now, would I like it to be updated a little bit more? Probably, but a lot of the people who play Warhammer more casually than I do probably don't want it to update as much because it moves too fast anyway. So this isn't me kind of trashing the game developers because I think they've got a really hard job of what they do. It is just me analysing the publication that's out there and maybe shining some light on some of the issues that we think we've come up with, and maybe you guys could add some more in the comments. But anyway, Adeptus Mechanicus, a brand new codex that kind of feels it hasn't done much with these new detachments that it's released. And I think there's a couple of fundamental problems with this codex and the reason why it's not doing very much. And I think the first one is that Adeptus Mechanicus are kind of like a shooting army. It's funny because they're not. Adeptus Mechanicus are a bit of an all-arounder army. They've got a lot of shooting units, but they've also got a lot of pretty much dedicated combat units. Think of shooting units as grav destroyers, the tanks that they come with, the walkers with the laser cannons, and then they've got walkers with giant sticks that are supposed to stab you in the face, and they've got little robots with sticks that are supposed to stab you in the face, and Castellan robots which shoot really well and punch you in the face. That's my boy. The army as a whole is a bit of a mixed bag. It's an all-around army. It's a kind of like a jack of all trades, but the faction rule is protector or conquer imperatives. It is solely shooting orientated. It does nothing for the melee units in the book. So you are forced to take a gunline army. And this faction ability only affects like maybe 2/3, maybe a little bit more than 2/3. I haven't counted, but it doesn't affect every single unit in the book like everybody else's faction detachment. I keep calling it detachment. Like everybody else's faction ability affects every unit in the army. The Adeptus Mechanicus only affects a majority of them, but there are a couple of units in the book that aren't affected, to a point where there is a detachment solely dedicated to giving the Castellan robots the faction detachment, and that is the detachment benefit. To give them the army rule. Maybe, just maybe, the Castellan robots need an upgrade. And Wargaming could help that with this NM710 SSD that's available in 500GB, 1TB, and 2TB capacity. I've been telling you a lot about this because Lexar are a great company and they wanted me to tell you that you probably need one of these in your laptop, your PlayStation, or anything else that can take an M2 SSD drive. It's light and compact, so it will fit in just a wide range of machines, probably one that you have already. It has a 5,000 megabit per second read speed, and it uses Generation 4x4 technology to boost your gaming performance. So if you want to support the channel and also upgrade your gear just before Christmas, then check out the link in the description, and thank you so much to Wargaming for sponsoring this video. And also, speaking of the faction ability, it is purely based on shooting, and it is, one gives you heavy, and the other gives you assault, and it changes the AP whether you're shooting into their deployment zone being shot at to reduce the AP, or shooting at in their deployment zone you gain AP. The thing is, because you gain heavy, the entire army is ballistic skill 4. There's like hardly anything that's ballistic skill 3 or better. It's mainly characters, but most of it is ballistic skill 4, and this is what is being forced into, shoehorned into a shooting army. Is only ballistic skill 4. Now, I don't know why they made it ballistic skill 4. I imagine because they have this heavy ability that if they were ballistic skill 3 and then the entire army gained heavy, they become ballistic skill 2. But then there's units that are ballistic skill 4 that don't get the heavy ability, like the Castellan robots. So they're always ballistic skill 4, and the only access to rerolls, it seems, is to be next to Call, who is arguably a bit too expensive and not very good outside of the reroll ones to hit. As well, the Protector, which gives you heavy, protects you in your own deployment zone, so it's good for backline units, but anything that starts moving, that wants to push ground, gets no benefit because they're not in your deployment zone and they've moved, so they don't get the benefit of heavy, when this entire game is about being in a position. It's about being on an objective. It's about being in this to engage on all quarters. It's to be in the middle to area deny. It's to be behind enemy lines, and it's only half about shooting with the tactical objectives, because most primaries are hold points on a board, so move. And then you look at Conqueror being assault and gaining assault and only shooting at stuff in their deployment zone, gaining AP. It's just really limited as well, because like you're only getting a benefit about the stuff that's probably going to be behind the deployment zone, because most of the battle happens in the middle of the board. It's where the two armies meet. It's obvious. So I think the faction rule is mediocre at best, and it doesn't affect everybody. So it's like you lose half your rule, or half the rules you get for turning up as an army is mediocre, and it doesn't affect everybody. And I think that's a little bit of an issue. I think overall as well, the general damage output of the army is pretty low. A lot of shots are high rate, low strength, low AP, low damage. It's lots of, you know, like 5 shots, 1 damage, and like 3 shots, 1 damage, 1 AP, 1 damage, and it hits on a 4 with 1 reroll. It's like not crazy. Like there's some really good units. Like people are just talking about breaches because they've got really good shooting and they're really good in combat. They are ballistic skill 4, but they have innate rerolls. So that suddenly becomes like a super useful unit, because compared to any other unit in the Codex, nothing feels quite as devastating as a 60-point model. They're like 290 points for 6. You need a Dominus in there to give them a feel no pain. So you're looking like a 300-point unit that is your one good shooting unit that's kind of good in combat, even though it only has 2 attacks each. And they're hard to get into combat because they're on 60-man bases. Otherwise, you're just spamming like 27 chicken walkers, because they are ludicrously costed at 45 points per model for one of the variants. But that is arguably one of the most expensive armies in Warhammer, because I think we worked it out. It is £1,012.50 for 27 chickens. And by chickens, I mean walkers. And it's only about 945 points, which is very, very expensive. Now, expense is one thing when we're talking about Warhammer. Usually when we're talking about competitive lists, we don't really look at price. But I think it's just quite interesting to go, maybe this is a funny one, but it does cost you £1,000 before discount, and the opponent will only score 900 points on Bring It Down in return. I think the rules that the Adeptus Mechanicus have are actually quite good on the data sheets, like the unique ones, like we've mentioned, the breaches, reroll 1s, unless they're near a battle line, then they reroll all hits. I think a lot of those rules are actually decent, but they're only really good near battle line, and the battle line are toughness 3 and really easy to kill. So if a smart opponent, if there's a really good rule that someone's banking on, such as say we're going to take 18 breaches that are all re-rolling to hits, if we focus on the infantry that stood behind them, now they're not re-rolling all hits, they're only re-rolling 1, so their efficiency drastically reduces. I think like data sheet rules can be really good, and they are pretty good, but I think they're kind of having like a nerfed version and then an obscene version near battle line, rather than just having like a pretty good middle line one. Would have been better to, rather than making all of these units have to be in the battle line and then forcing you to take all these battle line and then being the first unit that dies because everyone takes indirect. And I think the fact that there was only 5 detachments in the book compared to everyone else who's had 6 or 7 so far, it's a little bit painful, but I don't think that's like one of the main problems with the book. I think it's just a bit painful when the Adeptus Mechanicus feel very limited to what they should be able to do, but they only have 5 detachments to choose from. One of them, as I've mentioned, gives some of the army the army rule again, so it's really only 4 that you get to play with, and one of them is an upgraded version of the index. It's a lot better than it was in the index, but it's nothing to like shout home about compared to other detachments that are being available for other factions. So I said breaches, dragoons, like the walkers, a lot of the walkers, but mostly dragoons, and like the characters, the Dominus and the Manipulates are really good, but they're like 3 or 4 units that you're kind of looking at. When it's an army of like quite a varied, it's not a complete, it could do with some units that it doesn't have to fill some gaps, but it has quite a variety of range. You kind of force it taking just like 3 units essentially. But the thing is with it is, I think this codex was written or in print before the Adeptus Mechanicus Index actually was released to the public. I think that's a pretty obvious thing. A lot of these codexes are already printed and ready to ship essentially before the game actually released, so they didn't have all of this millions of games being played every way in the first 6 months data to analyze how these factions actually interact with each other. And I think we've seen changes from like index to codex. I don't think that's from a balancing point of view just yet. I don't think that's gone, oh, actually, this army was really bad, so we're going to make it really good now. I think that is purely they had the index, they sent those to print, and then they went back and reviewed it for the codex and went, actually, that doesn't work. I think a good example of that is like Crypto Thralls. They had like a huge change between index and codex. I think the codex was printed before the game came out, so I think they must have spotted that before everyone else kind of jumped on it and having it as a really good rule. But I think because of that, because we're still in a physical age of rules right now, even if we are like half digital, half physical, the problem is with physical books is they get printed, and I think the only way they can fix that is either a huge balanced data slate that changes how the army critically functions and a lot of the data sheets on the paper, or they're going to reduce the points of Admech and do what they've done with Leagues of Votann and make them really good because they're really cheap, so you just get loads of it. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want Adeptus Mechanicus players to have their entire army drop by 20% in points. They get 20 more stuff on the models, because it's a phrase I coined on stream. I've definitely read it somewhere. I just don't remember where. But that isn't fixing the faction, or that isn't the developers fixing the faction. That is the player fixing the problem of just buying more stuff. Like, again, don't want to like labor on the point about Games Workshop and Warhammer being expensive, because it is expensive. No one can deny that. But having the problem and then the fix being just buy more stuff and the army will work well, I think is it's a slippery slope. Again, we've seen it with Leagues of Votann. They are really good now, but that's because all their really good units are really cheap and you get loads of them. I don't think the faction as a whole is actually very good. It's just you've got so much stuff, it's kind of hard to deal with. Like, look, 30 half guard, 9 Sagittars, and then whatever else you want because you're only at 20 points in your list. Feels a bit silly. I think the initial fix would be drop the points, but I don't think that's right. That's essentially what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that I think fundamentally the codex is on a completely different level to the other codexes that have been released. I don't even think the other codexes are that broken. I said everyone's looking at 18 wraiths and Necrons with an immortal bomb. I don't think it's broken. I think it's pretty strong. Eldar and Chaos is still the problem. But like, none of the codexes have come out and been crazy good. There's been some interesting builds that have come out of them. But it feels like the Adeptus Mechanicus are definitely down a few tiers compared to the other codexes. Let's say all the other codexes are B tier. This definitely feels like a C, a D, if not an E. And I think that's like a bit of a problem when like people's main army, like Tom, for example, or people's only army, Adeptus Mechanicus, it's just hard to like look at it and go, that's going to be a really good list, because when really you're just going to be like, I don't own enough breaches right now. Maybe. I mean, I'm just using that as an example. But that's what I think. That's what the chat thinks. Again, we had a few comments from the live stream. We had some comments during the stream, and that's kind of like cultivated this thought piece about Adeptus Mechanicus. And I just wanted to pass the question off to you. Let me know what you think about Adeptus Mechanicus down in the comments, and probably what the big fix should be. I think a big balanced data slate is probably going to be okay, because they can just go, well, the codex was already printed. We didn't know it was going to be this bad in the meta, and we're just going to do all of this to make it work. And maybe that'll be okay. Or there'll just be loads of angry comments saying, well, the codex is rubbish. Why are you having to change it for free? But again, this isn't a hate piece on the game developers. I think they do a great job. It's just a thought piece about the state of Adeptus Mechanicus and probably the general deflation of bringing that army out of a cupboard and put it on the tabletop, because why would you, unless you already own the list that might be the list, the only one that feels like it can compete. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one, or even at 7 PM, because that's when I'm live.